Hey, everybody. A very nice, warm welcome on this beautiful Thursday. Welcome. This is my live stream. This is Ari, and I have a special guest waiting in the wings. I'm very excited about. This live stream is going to tell you about a new practice group that is starting this week and with a new guest teacher. So I am super excited that we already have Josh Cohen teaching on our platform. He's doing a class on 60s songs right now, and he's also teaching some tapping on our platform. But we're having a new guest tutor, and I am super excited to introduce him to you in a moment. And before that, I will just tell you a little bit about what this program is and what this format is. So we call it practice groups, and it works essentially like this. You are on Zoom, and for 10 weeks we meet at the same time. It's depending on your time zone, but we will have all that info up in a second for you. But we meet once a week, and you get a little bit of homework. There's a presentation on what to work on, and then you get to practice it. And it's low key, we don't put people on the spot. We just want people to participate and have fun. But it's very motivating because you see the others might be practicing, and there's a little bit of homework you're getting, and there's personal interaction. So it's really fun. And we call these the practice groups. And the latest practice group that we are doing is with none other than Mr. Rob Smith. And I'm going to bring him in here. Hey there, Rob.
Hello.
Very warm welcome. I'm going to ask the chat on YouTube to please give me a little test 1, 2 receiving. We got you. And also the same on Facebook. So we are streaming live to my group, to my page, to my profile, and we're also streaming live to YouTube. So please, guys, if you would check in, because we don't want to just make this a presentation. We want to hear from you as well. And we have lots of questions for you. And we want to invite you into the conversation. Rob Smith, amazing bass player, good buddy. Him and I can talk for hours about music education and about bass. And we love, these conversations and really digging deep. Rob, tell me about you and Rock.
So I'm a full-time bass instructor and performer. I've been teaching for around 20 years, which is hard to believe. I've taught, at this point, I've kind of figured it out, over 30,000 lessons, which is ridiculous. Yeah, I sat down, I was like, let me do the math real quick. And I looked at the number, I was like, that can't be right. It's right. I taught over 30,000 lessons. I played with a lot of different rock bands over the years, done shows, the band Visible at Night, Endless March, Minor Arcana, Disciples of Groove, playing shows like we opened for Shinedown, Godsmack, Slash from Guns N' Roses, doing like bigger venues, done rock tours and stuff like that. And one of the reasons I want to do a class on riffs is because so many of the bands that I've played in over the years were kind of riff-based bands. For me, there's basically two kinds of bass lines. There's bass lines over chord changes, where you're playing with a singer or songwriter, and they say, hey, here's a bunch of chords, come up with something. Or there's riffs. And with the riffs, you have to nail the riff. You have to really know what you're doing. And so many of the bands I play with, a lot of like the progressive rock bands, if you're not nailing the riff, the song kind of falls apart. So I love songs with great riffs. So I wanted to, present some of my favorite riffs of all time, some of the most classic riffs of all time, and help give people a really solid foundation with, some of the most classic riffs and things that they'll be playing forever.
That sounds fabulous. When you teach a riff, what do you think is, like you were saying, you can't fake it, right? So you really have to know the riff exactly, because there might be people doubling and so forth. So you have to know it exactly. But if you know a bunch of riffs, right, that's great and super. Mm-hmm. But why is that good for your playing? What does that do for you? How does that expand what you do?
So there's a couple things for me. I think when everyone's setting up their practice routine, one of the most important things is to practice less. And it's not less time, practice as much time as you can. But I see a lot of people that are like, I'm going to learn these 64 bars of music. And then they go and they play 64 bars of music kind of bad, right? Because they're just rushing through it. One of the things a riff does is it really focuses your practice. It's like, hey, here's a 1 bar, 2 bar, or 4 bar phrase, and you have to get it down, right? So I love working on riffs because it's like I can sit down in one practice session and say, I'm going to work on this 2 bar riff. And it super focuses me, and it makes sure like I'm really nailing it. The other thing that I think is really important is that when you have a good foundation of riffs, it prepares you to learn new music, right? Everyone should definitely put on records, try to figure out riffs by ear, and learn as many things as you can by ear. But ear training is also brain training, right? When you learn riffs and you have a foundation of riffs, you kind of train your brain to expect certain things. So when you put on a song, even if it's a song you've never heard before, you can go, oh, wait a minute, those notes are like these other notes. Like I remember when I was first learning, like one of the first riffs I learned was Heartbreaker by Led Zeppelin. And it's just these notes, right? So it's like kind of like the first, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notes of a blues scale. And I learned that riff, right? And I remember later I heard Hey Bulldog by the Beatles. And I could kind of hear there was a similarity there between that and Heartbreaker. I was like, wait a minute, there's something going on there. Like I've already kind of trained my ear a little bit to hear that Heartbreaker riff. So when I heard that riff, I could kind of hear, okay, wait a minute. That's also using the first 5 notes of the blues scale. There's that overlap there. Different key, but I still heard that kind of relative pitch. So learning a lot of really great riffs kind of sets your ear up to learning great riffs in the future. You could take songs that you've never heard before, and you're going to hear some similarities. You're going to go like, okay, I have these foundational riffs. I have these things that I've kind of prepared, whether it's like Zeppelin tunes or Beatles tunes or 90s rock or metal stuff. When you go to learn new music, you've kind of already prepared the techniques and also the general tonalities that go into a lot of riffs. A lot of the riffs use the similar kind of note choices. But the rhythms make them different. So, by learning a lot of riffs and having that good foundation, it just makes it easier to learn things in the future.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well said. I have a question for the audience. In a moment, I'll ask you the $1 million question, Rob. But I have a question for the audience. What are some of your favorite rock riffs? Why don't you put into the chat like some of your favorite rock riffs? Maybe we can put you on the spot a little bit. See like a trivia test to get to play them. But here's the $1 million question. What do you think makes a riff good? I mean, some of these riffs are so iconic and have stood the test of time. Why?
So there's a couple of factors. The repetition is the first thing, right? It's almost all great riffs are 2 bars. There are some 1-bar riffs and there are some 4-bar riffs. But as I was going through, the list, I did a list of 100 of my favorite riffs, and almost all of them were 2 bars, or they were a riff that repeated and then had variation. So that's the first thing. It's repetitive. It's something that just it happens over and over again. It's going to stick in your ear. And the other thing for me was the rhythm, right? If talk about like Heartbreaker and Hey Bulldog, the note choices are simple and they're kind of the same for both riffs, but the rhythms are totally different. And those rhythms really make it stand out. A lot of my favorite riffs are syncopated. Like I was talking about "Sunshine of Your Love" on a video, and it's all upbeats, right? It's those kind of syncopations, and I think the rhythm's a big part of it. There are some of my favorite riffs that are kind of just like straight 8th notes, but for the most part, my favorite riffs, the ones that stick to me, I just have great rhythm. Like riffs by like Rage Against the Machine, and like my favorite Metallica riffs, and my favorite Zeppelin riffs, and my favorite Beatles riffs and Pink Floyd riffs. They all have these cool rhythms. The actual note choices, the actual theory behind what notes work in a riff, that's not that complex. You can learn that pretty quick. But refining the riff and coming up with cool rhythms, is an important thing. And I actually talked about this in the video. If anybody's seen the video, one of my favorite things to do is just steal rhythms. You take your favorite riffs and you go like, hey, can I try writing something with this rhythm? So you take a classic riff and you say, okay, how can I use this? I know the rhythm's cool. Let me try to write something with totally different notes, but with that rhythm. And that's like a great approach to coming up with stuff, and kind of helps you create or helps you get rid of writer's block. If you're just stuck and you're like, I can't think of anything. You steal some element of something you already love, and then you can come up with something original with it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. When you start expanding it and you kind of try to play in the style off, or you try to imitate the rhythm, or you try to imitate the phrasing, and especially like when you double with a guitar or with drummers or something, you want to pay really attention. Where are the accents? How's it cut off? Where is it laid out? And you want to really go into the nooks and crannies, which just on itself is so good for your ears, and it's so good for your technique, because you have to execute, this little dead note or whatever it is. And yeah, I think it learning rock riffs makes your precision much higher. It sharpens your listening skills. It sharpens your skills. And as you were saying, once you go beyond that and you do something with it, then you really start making that style your own, that type of thing your own. Has it ever happened to you that you like figured out a really cool riff and then you go, oh, that's all it is? It's
absolutely, yeah. There's definitely works with that, and a lot of times it's just it's the note choices. Like I remember like learning extremely complex music where I went like, okay, like that's not that complex scale wise. It's just how they're playing that.
Yeah.
If you take like something like Schism by Tool, which the first time I heard it, I was like, what is that? That's crazy. You get that. Right, it starts out with that little chord thing, and then that main riff. The note choices aren't that complex. It's like D minor stuff. It's using like 5 notes from the D minor scale, not that crazy, but rhythmically, it's like wild. It's a pretty odd time thing. There's a lot of different ways to count that. I've seen it written in 5. I've seen it written in I think a bar of 5, bar of 7, things like that. But like hearing a riff like that, and I remember the first time I heard it, I was like, what is that? I gotta figure that out. And that quick triplet, which is tricky, but note-wise, it's not that crazy, So there's a lot of riffs like that where I sat down to learn them, and I went, okay, this is not that wild, note-wise, but it's rhythmically really cool. And I've always kind of like approached writing riffs the same way, where it's like, okay, it doesn't have to be, I don't have to use every single note. I don't have to shove all 12 notes of the chromatic scale into this riff. You can make a 2-note riff work. There's classic 2-note riffs. There's it's a 2-note riff, or it's a 2-note riff. The note choices don't have to be that crazy. You can make 2-note riffs, 3-note riffs, and make them really cool. So we all have to kind of look at our own writing that way. I've had students like that before, where every time I give them some kind of writing assignment, they're like, it's got to be the craziest thing. It's got to be the most wild thing. It's like, nah, it just has to be cool. And it can be a really, really simple thing. You could use 3 notes, but make it rhythmically cool, and it works. So,
can you just, for example, Under Pressure, just take that riff and try to do something different with it, just using different notes?
Totally. I mean, you can make that much more complex note-wise, right? So rhythm, we have, bump, 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 1 and 2 and a 3 and, right? So it's just like 8th note, 8th note, 8th note, 2 16th notes, and then 8th note, right? That's the rhythm. Pretty simple. 1 and 2 and a 3 and, right? So you can take any kind of scale you want, any kind of exotic sound. It could be major, it could be minor, right? One of the ones I liked working with, and I did this in the video too, is this Phrygian dominant kind of, it's like a more exotic scale. The first time I heard it was like this, that Tool song, which I really like that sound a lot. So I mean, you could take the rhythm for Under Pressure and put it into a scale like that, right? So if I go, that's just the scale. Dun, 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 dun. Now let's change the order of it. So. Right? That's the Under Pressure rhythm. And I can mess with that. So, now it's a totally different thing. Like, it doesn't sound like Under Pressure at all. And you can do that in any scale. You can go to your regular minor. Let's go to D minor, right? And same kind of feel. We'll do so that's kind of a nice little melodic thing. And no one's going to hear that and go like, "Oh, that's definitely Under Pressure." It doesn't sound anything like Under Pressure. But if that's the same rhythm, 1 and 2 and the 3 in. It's cool line now. You change the tempo, I can go way faster or way slower. You know, and then you do variations on it. But yeah, I mean, I love that. You know, trying to take a really, really simple riff, completely changing the notes, or you try to take a really complex riff and, you know, try to simplify the notes. You know, you go and take a riff with a bunch of notes and you say, okay, let me like see if I can use this cool rhythm and make it a 2 or 3 note riff. And it's all about experimenting. And one of the things I'm going to do during the class, and one of the things I love doing with all my students, is just showing you different ways to be creative, you know, with this information, different ways to write even if you've never written music before. I think it's really useful to start putting any kind of scale thing, you know, or any kind of theory thing into practice as soon as possible. You know, try coming up with your own riffs, try coming up with your own bass lines. And by focusing on riffs, it's just like anyone can write 2 bars of music, right? Like anyone, even I have beginner students that have been playing for 1 month, they can write 2 bars of music. If I said, hey, write me a 10-minute, you know, magnum opus, it's like, it's still going to be tough. But if I said, hey, write me a 2-bar riff using these 3 notes, do it, you know, and by you know, trying to be creative with your instrument, it helps you to be connected to how things are going to sound as they're coming out of your instrument. It makes the theory so much more useful, and it makes it just very, very easy to visualize, because you go like, okay, I know how this scale looks, but I also know this riff that I wrote that's using that scale. And since this is something I created, I'm not going to forget that. I'm going to remember how this shape looks. So we'll go over all kinds of ways to like create your own riffs and like, you know, break out a writer's block and be creative with this stuff. You know, learning the techniques, learning the fingerings, you know, going back and trying to learn as close to the original fingerings as possible. I watched a bunch of videos for all these riffs. You know, it's funny because there's a lot of riffs I was playing wrong. You know, and not wrong notes. I had the notes right, but it was I wasn't using the same fingerings that Jack Bruce and Paul McCartney were using. And I went back and watched videos of them and went, oh, okay, like I didn't realize Paul McCartney does this. You know, right? And he stretches out with his pinky. I was playing before like this and doing that. So I was playing the notes in a different position, and they both work, but I wanted to make sure everyone was getting like the most accurate fingerings possible. Like on every PDF I've written out for the class, this is like, hey, this is as close to the original as I could possibly, you know, find. This is the exact fingering Jack Bruce, Paul McCartney used, John Entwistle, John Paul Jones, and then here's all the fingerings. Like if you like these fingerings more, then do it this way.
I mean, I'm often of the mind, if you find a fingering that works better for you, it's okay to use it. But I do want to know what they did, because sometimes it shows you something about the creative process. Sometimes the way slides are used, you have to use it in a certain way of, you know, fingering a certain way. And this is also one of the reasons why I do, and I know you do too, use tap a lot in teaching, even though it is not technically speaking the proper way to read and all that. But you can tell fingerings. You also meet people from where they are at. A lot of people are just tap-based learners. So I really like using tap and bringing it in, and I appreciate it that you have and you will bring that into the class as well.
Exactly, yeah. I write everything out in standard notation and tab. Because you might see the same exact riff written 3 times in a row, and in the standard notation it'll look exactly the same, but in the tab you'll see 3 different fingerings. You know, so I read it in tab just because for me it's the best way to visualize the fingerboard. Like it looks more like a fingerboard than notation does. And I read notation. I've done musical gigs. You know, I've done like Broadway type gigs where it's like, hey, here's a book, read these dots on paper and get everything right. And I've done those gigs, and my reading, you know, is good, but even when I'm writing stuff out for myself, a lot of times I'll use tab to experiment with fingerings. Like I was just working on this kind of challenging solo, and I was learning it from notation, and it was working out well. But there was some parts where I was like, man, like I'm not really getting a great fingering. And actually, I wrote it out into my notation program, wrote it out in MuseScore, and I just started adjusting notes in the tab. You know, just like moving things to different strings and going like, what's the best fingering? And once I had something that like visually looked great, I was like, okay, let me try playing that. And it just like, it helped me to come up with the best possible fingering. And I could have learned it with a bad fingering. I could have, you know, obviously played it, you know, with a suboptimal fingering, and I would have sounded okay. But by, you know, using the tab and visualizing exactly, you know, how it laid on the fingerboard, I was able to come up with a fingering that worked a lot better for me. So yeah, if anybody in the class wants standard notation only, I mean, all I have to do is click one button on MuseScore and it gets rid of the tab. I can easily send you just standard notation. But I'll definitely have tab for everything with the most accurate fingerings I can find.
Yeah. I love that. I want to just go into the chat and just read you a couple of the favorite rock riffs we have here. We have "Money" by Pink Floyd. Want to give us a sample of that?
One of the best ones ever.
It sure is.
And that might be the first odd time riff I ever learned. That might be the first.
Oh,
it's in seven, right?
Yeah.
Do. Right? That's probably the first odd time riff I ever learned was "Money." And then after that was probably Rush stuff, you know, like "Free Will," like. Which I think is like a bar of 6 and a bar of 7.
Yeah.
You know? But yeah, I think money is definitely one of like the greatest rock bass lines ever.
Lovely.
I see another one bites the dust in there, you know.
Yep.
Another great riff that uses 3 notes, right? A riff that just uses 3 notes, but the rhythm's killer, you know.
Exactly, and so iconic. Immediately latch onto it.
Yeah, I see good times too, and good times is another bass line that starts with the same bum bum bum. Both those tunes.
Yeah.
Day Tripper in there. We'll get fooled again. Yeah, I love John L. Whistle too. He's a monster. Yeah, Day Tripper. That's one of the ones that I was always playing with a different fingering. You know. And part of it might be because McCartney plays it, you know, in general a short scale bass, so it's not as bad for him to get his pinky up there. But yeah, after watching video of him playing it live, I was like, okay, cool. Like that's how he's doing it, and it sounds like he's usually sliding into that note there. Because I've seen some fingerings where like it was like that. And if you're doing that, not only are you like overstretching, but you're getting rid of the slide or hammer on that kind of, you know, is necessary for the overall feel of that riff.
100%.
Let's see. Yeah, check out the chat. Yeah, no one bites the dust.
Betsy, James Brown.
Yeah, Sir Duke, man. Was it? No. That's what it is. Was it? Should remember it. That's it. Yeah.
Play that down.
Yeah, that bass line's incredible.
So when you were talking about, learning riffs and then doing more with them, this is a question that I've thought about a lot, because a lot of students or people, especially when they're self-taught, they just learn a ton of songs and they hope that somehow through osmosis and through just doing it a lot, they will get better players overall, right? And I am assuming that your view on that point is going to be a little bit similar than mine. But why don't you say what your reaction would be to that sort of idea? Well, just do it a lot, just learn a lot of songs, and then somehow it will, you will become a better player. What's your view on that?
You'll get a little better. you learn a lot of songs, you're going to get better at playing bass. I think you do have to connect the music you're learning to some other things, right? So when I first started learning bass, I think that's kind of what I did, was I just learned a lot of songs, and it was like Metallica and Pantera and Nirvana and Pearl Jam and 90s rock stuff, and then got into like Red Hot Chili Peppers, and I got a little better, I got better at playing those songs, but it really wasn't until I started to learn the bass, like learn the neck, learn some scales, learn some patterns, learn arpeggios, that kind of stuff made it much easier to learn new songs and also to memorize the songs you had.
Rob edited this book. Rob edited this book. He was one of our beta testers and kind enough to play through it. And
I got a copy too.
Thank you. Yes, hold them both up. Take a screenshot. So yeah, go on. I didn't want to interrupt you.
But yeah, I think learning new songs is very important, and that like everyone wants to play tunes and play music, but you also want to associate those songs with like bigger picture stuff, right? So when I learn a riff, I'll kind of think about, okay, first of all, what key is this in? What scale is this in? what are the different positions I can play this on the bass? You know, really knowing your neck kind of stuff. Stuff that just, you know, kind of helps you to just become a better musician overall. I think it's important to know basic scale patterns. Like I think, you know, almost every melody you've ever heard is in some kind of scale. You know, most of them are major or minor. There are some that are in more exotic scales. But you want to be able to, like, not only learn the music, but associate the music with bigger picture stuff. You know, scales, arpeggios, chord changes, like all those kind of things. And knowing that connection, you know, knowing the song, but also knowing kind of the theory behind the song, you know, will just help you be a better musician. It helps you to write better. It helps you to improvise better. It helps you to learn new songs faster. And I noticed once I started learning some of the patterns and some of the scales and stuff, I was able to memorize songs a lot faster because I just had words for what was happening. You know, I could take a whole riff and go like, oh, cool, it's in this blues scale, or oh, this is in minor, or this is in Phrygian, or like, okay, cool, I know what's going on here. And be able to like use a short phrase that gives you a whole lot of information is kind of important for your memorization. If I just go like, okay, I'm using these notes, I'm using like E and F and G and A and B and C and D, you know, that's a lot of information. If I just go, okay, I'm using E Phrygian, that's like a very, very short thing to memorize. And if I'm learning a riff that's in E Phrygian, you know, like a Metallica riff, you know, it's a lot easier for me to memorize because that's like, cool. I know it's an E Phrygian. I know where those notes are, you know, and I can kind of hear it too. So that's for me. It's like learning songs, I think is important. We all want to learn like the best riffs, but also connecting that to, you know, some, you know, essential music theory is really important, and using that information to come up with your own stuff and write and improvise is all.
100%. I've met so many students who've kind of figured out that there's an underlying logic, you know, because certain things keep repeating, certain things keep sounding the same, they look the same on the fretboard, so they kind of begin to understand this is a pentatonic. They can even, you know, hear it, feel it, but something happens when you have a name for it. Isn't it? I mean, it's like you, and even just note names. If I can say that's a G on the E string or whatever, and I can just really like identify, it's not just a random dot and a random shape, but it's a very specific thing. So that's what, you know, learning music theory.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at a piece of, you know, I was talking about tab before, if you looked at a piece of tab, you just had like 4 bars of music, and I said, hey, memorize this number sequence. Like, right. That's incredibly hard for most people to do, is to memorize like a sequence of 30 numbers. Like, hey, memorize these 30 numbers and repeat them back to me. It's like, man, like most people can't do that. Well, most people can learn a 4-bar riff and memorize a 4-bar riff pretty quickly. And it's because you're not memorizing note to note or number to number. You know, you are looking at things as a bigger picture thing. You're hearing something as this cohesive thing. And, you know, knowing kind of the underlying scale, you know, and knowing positions, knowing patterns, like all that stuff just makes the memorizing so much easier, because you go like, okay, cool, like this is all in this position. I do this one shift and I play this part in this position, and then it's like, cool, I've got the idea of what this whole thing is. But yeah, I think it's important to, you know, learn some of the best music ever. You know, like try to like make sure you have that stuff in your hands. But then also like kind of like dig deeper into it and go like, okay, why does this work? You know, or how is this similar to other things that I also like? You know, that's a kind of a great thing to do, is like, I like these 5 riffs. Why do I like these 5 riffs? Are they rhythmically similar? Are they similar scale wise? It's like, well, is the mood similar? Usually if the mood's similar, they're similar scale wise. You know, that's kind of the reason for me to learn scales and modes and things. It's like, what mood am I creating here? You know, it's like if I play in Dorian, what's the vibe? If I play in Lydian, you know, how's that different? And if you're never kind of thinking about the scales as a feeling or as an emotion, then you're more likely to kind of just like toss them aside, be like, okay, it's not a feeling, it's not an emotion, it's a finger pattern. It's like, well, it's a pattern, memorize the pattern, but it's also there's a feeling that goes along with that. You know, when somebody plays a certain chord and you play a certain scale or arpeggio with that chord, there's an emotional kind of response to the harmony and to the melodies you're creating. So you want to be thinking about all those things. You want to be thinking about, okay, what's the pattern of this? What's the overall vibe of this? You know, what's the emotional content of this? Thinking about when you're working on a riff, what's the tone of this? You know, are they using distortion? You know, are they, you know, I think you'll be able to hear this if I do this. You know, I remember when I was learning like 80s Metallica stuff, you know, and I was playing, you know, it was like, yeah, that's fine. That's kind of the right thing. But I mean, Cliff was using a lot of distortion. You know, when I started focusing on tone, and started focusing on, okay, like make sure like not only have the right notes, but like let me get the sounds. Let me try to dial in, you know, what is this bass player playing on the front pickup or the back pickup? You know, are they using a pick? Are they using their fingers? Are they using their thumb? Are they using distortion? Are they using compression? Those kind of things too. So we'll definitely discuss a little bit of that in the class as well, where it's like, hey, listen to the tone of this line. You know, listen to, you know, like, were they playing with a pick? You know, were they playing with their fingers? You know, it's like I don't want to get like everyone cover your eyes, but you know, that's a pick. You know, we're allowed to use these. They sound cool. You know, there's you know, there's a certain tone with a pick. You know, that's different than a finger sound. You know, and there's certain bass lines and certain bass players that if you want to capture what they're doing, you know, like playing with a pick is cool, man. You know, like just listen to Chris Squire. From Yes, you know, like he played with a pick on everything, and his sound was always awesome, and his lines were always awesome. You know, so we'll talk about, you know, tone, techniques, theory, all that stuff.
What's the general level that people should be at when they, you know, if you use a lot of theory, like, shall we say, are you going to be breaking it down just a little bit? What's the general level you could say would be the class would be good for?
Honestly, you could be a very beginner, and it'd be totally fine for you because anything we go over is going to be explained. You could be intermediate if you already know your theory. Awesome. Like if you're coming to class and you go like, I know major scale, minor scale, that kind of stuff, then you'll be able to jump on those kind of things, you know, right away. So I would say any beginner or intermediate players, we'll start with some really easy riffs. You know, some stuff where everyone can play it. You know, like some of those 2-note riffs. We'll start with some of that stuff. Some stuff that's not technically too hard. And as the class goes on, you know, work on some more challenging things, you know, and then push people's technique and, you know, get into stuff where, you know, you're doing more string skipping, stuff where you're playing more horizontal across the neck. So honestly, you know, beginner or intermediate bass players, you know, if you know no theory and only read tab, it'll work. If you can read standard notation and you know a lot of theory, you know, awesome. You'll still probably learn things because, you know, not many people will know every single riff we go over, and not many people will know, you know, like every single kind of like technique and, you know, writing idea as well. So if you're intermediate and you know tons of riffs already, but you want to learn, you know, more of how to expand and how to write your own riffs, awesome. That'll work for you too. If you're a very beginner and you never played any riffs and you want to learn like the essential riffs to have a good foundation, that'll work for you as well. So.
And you're really going beyond just here's the riff, learn it, go. You know, that's what's important to me. So I think, you know, people who are self-taught, who know how to read tab, who know how to pick up things by ear, will get interested in this theory bit that you're mentioning here and there, and maybe it'll send them down a good rabbit hole as well. I want to bring up a comment, just a beautiful comment from Kimway. And she says, love the point about mood being created by scale. Why didn't anyone mention that scales had to use back when I was learning them as a kid? That's what he says. And I wanted to just bring that up because that is such a great point that you made, Rob. I had a teacher at the University of Miami who completely opened my eyes for that, like how modes create a mood and how can you go from the brightest mode, which is Lydian, all the way down to the darkest mode. And you can take such a variety, and then you change one note, you make it even brighter, you know, than the modes of melodic minor and what have you. And this connection of mood with the collection of notes was such an eye-opener for me. And I can just see how when you go through these riffs, you know, you have something, you know, on a Phrygian, really dark mode, you know, and then you go to like, you know, just a minor pentatonic or something, you know, where the rhythm might be more, you know, defining the thing or whatever. I just find that a really, really fascinating topic. So students of that practice group can look forward to that. Thank you for that great comment, Kimmy.
Yeah, great comment. I think some musicians, you know, like that's their whole thing. Like I know, I played with a sitar player one time, and with like the Indian like ragas and stuff, you know, like that's kind of like the whole vibe is like we're gonna improvise in this one like kind of scale, this one idea for 30 minutes, and it is to create a very very specific mood, right? And they're like, okay, this pattern and these note ideas create the atmosphere. And yeah, approaching your scales not only from a pattern, but also like, you know, like how does the music that uses these scales make you feel in general, right? You know, like if you take like 10 songs that use minor, there's overlaps in mood. If you take like every major melody ever written, there's overlaps in mood. And if it's like diatonic major, it's probably pretty happy sounding, right? You know, you take like, you know, or right? Like all those melodies are happy, right? You know, they're all in that major scale. And then if you take like every Phrygian like, you know, riff you've ever heard, like there's a certain mood that happens. So yeah, I think that's definitely a great comment. Scales aren't meant to just be played up and down, right? Like it's like, you know, just like playing the scale up and down and getting used to it. Cool. Like you get used to your scale patterns, and you know you get used to playing through your scales. But like once you have some patterns down, it's like there's nothing stopping you from writing a melody or writing a riff, you know, or trying to come up with a song. And that's kind of where all this starts to make sense. You know, at least that's where it started to make sense for me. It's like, okay, I know a pentatonic scale now. It's like, why is this useful? And then I learned, you know, Heartbreaker, and I went, okay, that's got this pentatonic thing, but there's something extra. And then I was like, okay, some people call this the blues scale. Okay, so what else is use the blues scale? And I learned Sunshine of Your Love, and I went, oh, that's a blues scale. I learned Hey Boulevard, and I went, oh, that's a blues scale. You know, and I was like, okay, cool. Like I can kind of see how this is useful. Here's 3 great riffs that use it. And I was like, okay, so that's it. You know, like all these riffs, they use pentatonic, and there's like this passing tone between the 4th and the 5th. And I'm like, that's how you make rock riffs cool, like easy peasy. And then I heard Black Dog, right? And I went, okay, like is that a blues scale? And I went, and I'm like, well, okay, on that one, the passing tone is somewhere else. Right? And I was like, okay, that's okay. So that's something else there. And then you know, I heard like YYZ, you know, and that has the passing tone in the same spot as Black Dog. I was like, okay, so there's these overlaps. You go, okay, this riff, and this riff uses this, and that's called the blues scale. This riff uses like the pentatonic, but they put the passing tone between the flat 7 and the root instead of between the 4th and the 5th, and these all have some overlap here, and you consistently associate the theory with like these different bits of music, and you go like, okay, like this is starting to create like this really clear picture where it's like these songs have this kind of mood, this kind of vibe, and this is what they're doing scale wise. These songs have this, you know, and you just kind of like learn, you know, like what bands did, you know, like is it strictly pentatonic? Is it pentatonic with this passing tone? Is it pentatonic with this passing tone? Is it minor scale? Are they using the 2nd and the flat 6? You know, is it something else? You know, and for me, like I don't think I actually memorized any of the modes until I learned a piece of music using the mode. You know, I learned all the modes. I went, okay, I'm gonna learn Phrygian and Lydian, and then I forgot them. You know, like I learned how to play them, and I kind of learned what they were, and then I just went like, oh, I don't remember. And then I learned some songs and some riffs that use those modes, and went, okay, I see why I would want to use this. Like we talked about Free Will from Rush before. Right, and it's got a Lydian sound. It's, you know, it's got major riff, but it uses that sharp 4. You know, that might have been the 2nd Lydian thing I learned. After Simpsons.
Yeah, it's rare to find entire songs that we would play in one single mode. Things often go in and out. I have started a collection in my ear training class on songs that are in one mode, or at least like as a section or something is in one mode. Right? So it's because I know people crave that. It's just sometimes not as clean, like the whole song is, you know, Dorian. Like
that's the great reason to learn riffs is because it's very rare to find a 2-bar riff that's like using different modes. You know, it's like usually like every riff is in one scale or one mode. You might find a song that's in 3 different keys or 4 different keys, or uses like, you know, maybe the verse is in major and the chorus is in minor, or vice versa. But usually when you work on these 2-bar riffs, it's pretty clear what's happening theoretically. So you know, learning these little bits of music kind of help you to really hyper focus on a lot of elements. You go, I'm going to learn this 2-bar riff, and I'm going to focus on the rhythm. I'm going to focus on the tone. I'm going to focus on what scale is happening. You know, I'm going to focus on the technique. And by not spreading it out over a 4-minute song, you can really focus. Because if you just say, I'm going to learn this 4-minute song, you might learn the 4-minute song and like completely ignore the tone, or like be messing up some things technically, or not analyze every single thing theoretically correct. But for 2 bars, like we can dig deep into every 2 bars and make sure, you kind of know everything that's happening. And that prepares you to take a deeper dive into, music in general. Like once you start listening that way and you go like, okay, let me take these 2 bars of music and like try to like dissect everything I can about these 2 bars of music, the tone and the technique and the theory, all that stuff. When you go to learn new music, like every time something new happens, you can do the same kind of thing where you go like, okay, cool. Like this is something new for me. This is some kind of new theory thing. Let's figure it out. Let's dissect it like we did with all those riffs. And it just helps you to become a better musician.
Yeah. It's sometimes also so interesting how very unexpectedly different styles fertilize each other. For example, the Smoke on the Water riff, I just did that in my rhythm class the other week, so that's why I was thinking about it. The Smoke on the Water riff, do you happen to know who that was inspired by?
I heard something, yeah.
It's Astrid Gilberto. It's from a bossa called Maria. That is complete. I mean, you hear the riff, it's being played in the beginning. But it's a totally different vibe. It's got the exact same notes in it. And it's, it's just so interesting how even if something is, maybe not a style, maybe you're not really into rock, but, when you start learning that, you start, realizing what makes rock and what makes, this hard sounding or dark sounding or what it is. And to give names to things and to have music theory to explain it, I think is a very fascinating process. We got another beautiful comment from Facebook where somebody is saying, nobody ever said anything why the composer chose the scale type they chose to develop. And I really think that is key, because that's why music is so fascinating, right? How do you get that mood? How do you get that sound? Now, I'm married to a composer, and I know he gets an assignment. This is supposed to sound cheery. This is a racetrack. This has to have high energy, and then he goes into his drawers of past influences or theory, or it's supposed to be like rock sounding, you already immediately have sounds, rhythms, theory bits that go with that, So I think that's what we're really hunting for. Nobody really says that, we're just kind of intuitive, well, because it's cool, But yeah. We are talking about these sounds.
And honestly, the best way to rate music in general is probably just like you hear amazing stuff in your head and it comes out of your instrument, right? Like if it was that simple and we could all do that all the time, then that's what we would do. We would just go like, I have these awesome riffs and ideas in my head, and I know exactly how they're going to look on the bass and exactly how to play them, right? But for most of us, like that aren't like just like uber geniuses, there are steps in between, right? They're like, I have some ideas in my head. They're a little bit blurry, but I kind of have some cool ideas. What's going on? How does that look on the bass, right? So for me, it was trying to associate like we were saying before, the moods and like kind of like just like general melodic concepts with how they look visually on the instrument. And if you are just like if you're constantly getting amazing riffs in your head and you know exactly how to play them, that's awesome. But for me, I had to learn the theory. I had to learn scales. I had to learn arpeggios. I had to learn like all that kind of stuff. It's funny. Like I wasn't very naturally talented at music when I first learned how to play. Like it wasn't like any of these concepts came like super easy to me. I just really like worked on all this stuff. I went like, man, I want to know how to write riffs like the bands I love. So I like dissected all these riffs, and I learned all the theory, and I learned what was going on with all this stuff. And I feel like anybody can get better at composing and writing and stuff by learning great music and by learning the building blocks for that music.
100%. I love it, Rob. I could keep talking to you about those, but we both have places to be at. I have a class starting in a minute. But 10 weeks with Rob, guys. He will show you riffs, I guess. Say just very briefly, what can attendees expect after those 10 weeks? How many riffs? What are they going to have learned?
So we're going to try to get through like 50 of the greatest riffs ever. I have a list of 100 riffs. So if people are like super overachievers and want extra stuff, we can do that. But we're going to try to get through at least 50 riffs. And you don't have to learn every single one of them. If there's a riff you hate, skip that one. But after 10 weeks, you'll know dozens of riffs. You'll know how to play dozens of riffs, and you'll know the theory behind those riffs. You'll know, the general building blocks that create those riffs. You'll have ideas on how to write your own riffs. Your technique will probably be better after 10 weeks of working on the music. And you'll be a better bass player overall, and you'll have a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. So you're all invited to check it out. This class starts this weekend. It's on Saturdays. Did I just write Thursdays? That's obviously wrong. I just wrote Thursdays. It's on Saturdays at 11 a.m. Pacific, and it's live on Zoom. All you need is an internet connection and a Zoom. If you're a little bit apprehensive about playing, I in my practice groups never make anyone play. We are highly encouraging it, though, and you are definitely in a safe environment to do that because we're all rooting for you, and it's a great place to get your feedback if you've never played for other people. But 10-week practice group with Rob. Here's the link once more. Also, if you want to learn more about Rob, he is at robsmithbass.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, Rob. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to start this course. And we'll see everybody online. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you.